Jonathan, great to see you. Thanks for making a bit of time to come and have a chat. I want to kick off with something that you said to me last time we spoke, and that was that most people, and I'm thinking in a medical context here, most people don't have the tools to understand the information in the lab reports that they're given if they're undergoing tests or whatever. Now, I think a lot of people would be quite shocked by that's the case. I mean, I'm sure it is the case. Why do you think that's important? I mean, why is that happening? Why do you think that's important? And what do you intend to do about it?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely talked about that. I think the reality is that there's two categories of people that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with, the end user, the patient, the consumer
Mm.
who is doing tests all the time. They're either triggering getting tests done themselves, or the clinician is driving those tests. And what happens is that an output comes, which is a PDF, a flat kind of report from a laboratory. They either might come directly to them, depending on what the pathway is and the flow, or it might come via the clinician. But the reality is that you've got a number of markers, you've got some parameters, and you've got a scale that says you're either within those parameters or you're outside or you're borderline. And I
Yeah.
think but with no other context. And that's the point. There's no other context. And I think for the patient or the consumer, it leaves them with a guessing game as to what that means for them. And they might have other, a medical context and history that's relevant, but what does it mean? And for the clinician, they're looking at a huge amount of reports all the time because most things in healthcare gets triggered, or the start off point is some type of lab report. And they're looking at a huge volume of reports. They have to look at them. They have to very quickly be able to identify if there are any issues, any concerns in them. And they then have to work out the most efficient way to communicate those. So one of the things that we're trying to do with BloodGPT is to provide tools to both help the clinician and the patient in a very kind of equitable way
So let
to
me let me just let me
understand.
just explore that a bit then. So just to put it in lay terms for a second, I mean, what I think you're talking about would be the results of some kind of blood test, for example, that you've just had. You've been to the doctor, you've had a blood test, they've sent it off to the lab, it comes back. Don't you just sit down with the GP and get them to explain it to you? And if that isn't enough, why not? I mean, just
Yeah.
explain why this is a problem for people.
Sure. So yes, ideally you sit down with GP. I suppose the question is, how quick do you get the chance
Yeah.
to sit down with the GP? How much time and quality do you get with the GP? And in the meantime, if it takes a number of weeks to get that appointment, you have this anxiety and potential anxiety waiting to understand your report is saying. Now, if you haven't received it, you have a big black hole of unknown, and
Yeah.
you have to be patient and wait. And sometimes there's quite a delay to get an appointment. If you have received a copy of the report, which depending, as I said before, on the flow and the pathway, you might have received it securely. You're looking at it, and what do? You might plug some questions into, Dr. Google and ask questions, right? Now, asking questions out of Google or even just out of ChatGPT itself right now is not the best way to get answers because all you're going to do is get this huge variation of extremes and an aggregate of information that doesn't give anything that's focused and specialized. And again, we are trying to do that and help people do that. So if the patient gets it in the first instance, they can get it with context. And if the clinician gets it and the patient has to wait, the clinician could actually send it to them securely with that context as well. Or it actually speeds up the process because the clinicians are not spending so much time inefficiently reviewing all these reports because we have the ability to kind of streamline the reporting for them.
So what you're saying is you people get better information and they get it quicker.
Yes.
And why does that matter? I mean, in terms of this as a business, I mean, why does that matter? I mean, what's wrong if somebody has to wait a couple of weeks? I mean, just
Well,
explain
there,
why that's a problem.
one, it could be that there are issues within or health matters of concern that are identified within the lab report, and therefore it needs to be addressed quickly. There is to a degree, a certain protocol in many healthcare businesses that if they see something, they flag it and they try and get to it quickly. But again, the volumes they're dealing with are immense, and the time pressure that clinicians are under is also. So it's a very tough system on clinicians to do that. So the quicker that somebody has tested that they can get the results, they can know whether they're okay, there's nothing of concern, or the quicker you can get into a proper pathway to address any concerns that might be sitting there, the better. And that building that efficiency efficiency into a health system can only improve the system, can only improve the patient experience, and the relationship actually between the patient and the health system or the clinician, whoever it may be.
Yeah. So what you're really saying is it's a win-win all round. It's better for the patient, it's better for the clinician, and it's better for the system, which presumably
Absolutely.
reduce cost in the long run. It makes it cost less costly, doesn't it? Um,
Yeah, no doubt.
Let me just take one step back. I mean, I think it's a great proposition. Let me just take one step back. I mean, why are you bothering to build a business? I mean, just let's go right back to why do you want to be an entrepreneur? Why are you bothering? Because I know building a business is hard work.
Mhm.
Why are you bothering?
Well, it's not the first business I've built. I started off as a lawyer in the city, which is in London, which is great training ground. I set up an advisory business straight after that. I was 6 years practicing. I set up an advisory business in the healthcare space, and I worked with lots of other businesses, and I was helping them. And yes, we were advisors, and we had a team of experts doing various different elements. But actually, you're so close to those businesses that you are part of the business. So I've already always been for 20 plus years involved in businesses, even as an advisor. And then as part of that journey, I've done my own healthcare startups previously and have continued over the last 3, 4 years since I exited my last healthcare business to kind of do advisory work. Um, you know, I came across BloodGPT because I experience issues in trying to also manage my own healthcare. There are multiple apps that you need to do manage your own healthcare to a certain degree, and monitoring lab reports is a very frustrating exercise.
Yeah.
And when I first was introduced to BloodGPT earlier in 25, I saw that and I said, oh, this solves my personal problem. And my personal problem was that I've done lab reports, I have bloods. I built a spreadsheet to try and monitor and trend analyze it, but actually I found it incredibly difficult. And there's a few reasons why I found that incredibly difficult. One is the terminology that's used across different labs is different.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
two is the measurement units can be very different. And I couldn't find a way to properly graph and see and look at that trends. When I was introduced to BloodGPT, they seem to be addressing all of these issues, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." And I think most businesses get driven out of a personal experience, a personal need.
Yeah.
And the actual original co-founders of BloodGPT, they had a personal need. One of the co-founders was advising a lot of his clients on healthcare and on fitness, and was looking at their blood results, getting them as flat PDFs, and found it incredibly frustrating in trying to extract the information and use it. And the idea kind of came from there. I appeared several months later, completely connected with the idea, and then I got involved in the business and have stepped in to kind of grow that business and help them do it. So I think when you feel as if you have a personal need, you then check whether there's a wider need and a wider experience. All the feedback we got was absolutely there is, and therefore you try to build a business that addresses that need. And of course, once you've started it, the business starts to take on a life of its own. And it evolves and it meanders. I don't mean it in with no direction, but it evolves and it changes,
Yeah.
and you have to do that as circumstances arise.
Yeah.
And we are 12 months in, and it's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah. And of course, the thing that I think people forget is that if you're young and you go for your annual trip to the doctor and you have a checkup and it's generally fine, that's one situation. As people get older and they have to go and see the doctor, and then not everything's fine, and then might have multiple problems. I mean, the whole thing just gets more complex, doesn't it? And of course, we've got an aging population, so you've got more people that are going to have more complex problems. So, which means that this kind of technological support is going to become increasingly important. So I mean, I can see why it inspired you, when you came across it. But let me just ask you about being the CEO, right? Because
Yeah.
my view is that being the CEO is like riding a roller coaster. There are good days, there aren't so good days. Most of the CEOs I've spoken to would agree with that. What is it about this business that kind of motivates you to get out of bed every day to ride that roller coaster? I mean, you could go and earn a boatload more money probably as a city lawyer. I mean, what is it that motivates you about doing this particularly? I mean, why is that important to you as the CEO?
Um, I think there's a little bit in your own DNA that you want to help create and build something.
Mm,
And when you create and build something and give value to the users or the customers of that business, it is a very satisfying exercise. Putting all the commercials and other things aside,
Yeah.
we have discussions with either B2C clients, users, patients, or the B2B side and businesses, and they all kind of respond with, "We really need this." I was at an event in a health tech event in Las Vegas back in October, and from when the kind of the stand area where I was at opened at 9 o'clock in the morning, quarter to nine, whatever time it was, I did not stop for literally 48 hours. It was relentless. And what was exciting and invigorating about it is that everybody came. I had people coming by, looking at it from a distance and giving me the card and say, "We need that. That is what we need." And then there's been follow up with them. There's been other conversations where people wanted a real kind of heart to heart conversation there in real time when I was at that stand talking, and they talked about the need to help people to understand what's going on. So I think getting that feedback is
Mm.
incredibly valuable. It's reassuring to a point, of course, that you're onto something that where there's need and there's interest and there's demand, but it also then kind of excites you and invigorates you to see, okay, how can I help? How can I move this forward? Where is the fit? And you realize that your preconceived ideas are not what the end game will be. We have learned an awful lot over the last several months already, and we expect to learn an awful lot more as we go forward. But that is part of the excitement, the joy, the challenge. As you say, you get up in the morning and you think, well, what's on my plate? Who am I talking to? We are looking for clients and customers and pilots. We are raising a seed round. We are experimenting by having conversations with big labs. Like I'm having a conversation with a lab that is processing hundreds of thousands of tests a day.
Mm.
Now, the excitement of trying to win a deal and a project with that business, even if it's not, they don't give us the 100,000 a day
It's
from day
addictive,
one.
isn't it, really? It's
It,
addictive, that stuff.
it is addictive, and you kind of thrive on it. It's almost like it's a competition, it's a challenge, and every single potential client deal that you're trying to do is its own in its own right. And which ones are going to get over the line, which ones are not, because actually the feedback loop is incredibly powerful. We've had some conversations with investors, and they have said, okay, so what jurisdiction are you focusing on? What is your ideal client profile? What's your ICP? And I have been pretty honest about it to say we have a few of each because we're a young business. I am not afraid to say we are talking to this type of business, A, B, C, and D, and we don't know exactly which ones are going to be the most frictionless ones that we're going to get over the line. And I think time will tell as we are growing. And when I say we already have some over the line, but the ones that are scale, the ones that will make a huge impact and on the business on BloodGPT, but then also have a huge impact as to the service we're providing and the solution we're providing, and therefore people benefit from it. And we're happy to be flexible in that way and work it out. We also have a team that's kind of located in different places. I'm in London, some of our team's in Cyprus, some of it is in Poland. Our company is actually set up in the US. So we're kind of trying to play to our strengths where we have relationships, what we're doing, where you're both opportunistic, but also strategically taking advantage of where you have relationships and where you can network and what you can do.
It's
And I
so
think there's nothing
interesting.
wrong with that.
No, that's right. I mean, it's so interesting the way you answer that because most people think business is all about making money. And then you actually talk to people. Making money is a sort of a byproduct, really. So it's interesting to hear
Mm.
you describe it that. But let me ask you about something that you mentioned there, though, about it's a tough gig. Where does the resilience come from? The ability to bounce back? I mean, what would you say? Would you say that's inherent to you? Is it something that you've learned and developed? Where does that come from?
Um, yes, I think resilience it's both inherent, but it's also learned.
Because it's pretty
Nothing.
essential, isn't it? It's pretty
Yes,
essential.
you have to have a thick skin. You have to be able to put on a brave face. You have to be able to BS a little bit. You have to be able to stick out your chest and puff it up and talk the game because if you talked about literal things, we're still an early stage business, which has some income, which has some clients, which has some pilots. So, and you get knocks along the way where you think you're going to have a deal, you think you're going to have something that kind of gets over the line and it doesn't get. Now, this is not my first rodeo. I have been in the advisory game a long time, both as a lawyer, actually, you see some deals that don't
Mm,
get over the line, they fall over. When I first set up my own healthcare advisory business, I was asked to come in and fix a load of deals that were struggling. So, like, I had to step in and find solutions. So I think finding solutions is part of the resilience, and the resilience then, builds on that. You have to be able to take knocks. You have to not take it personally, and you have to kind of get up and keep fighting. And I think when you've had some knocks, and I've certainly had some, most people who have been in business have had various types of knocks to different degrees. You take it on the chin. Your chin gets tougher, and you keep on going. And if you're in the role that I'm in as a CEO, you also have to put on that brave face for the rest of the team, and you
mm,
have to give them encouragement, and you have to contextualize, why this has not gone well, what has gone over the line. That isn't necessarily criticizing team because it's a team effort. You're a small team, you're all working together for the end goal, but you also have to give perspective about what it is and how to address it, and then how to move on. So yeah, you need to be strong. You need to have a kind of your own energy force to keep on driving, right?
So
And that's the other thing.
Muhammad Ali famously said, "It's not getting knocked over that is the end; it's not getting up that's the
Yeah.
problem." Have you ever had a situation where you've taken such a big hit and you thought, "God, I don't know how I'm going to recover from this"? Have you ever had one of those, and has that impacted on you at all?
Yeah. I have had that. I have had a startup that looked like it was never going to get there. You're looking about how you kind of are going to keep the lights on, what you're going to do, and sometimes you make a call to say, actually, we're not quite there yet. The
Mm,
funding is tight. There's only so much money you can put back into the business, maybe yourself. And you kind of say, well, I have got to do an early exit. And you got to take that on the chin and realize that
mm,
you didn't get the return that you were looking for, but also those people who might have supported you, invested with you, didn't get the return. And they are really, really tough conversations to have.
mm,
Because often when people invest with you, they invest because of you. So it's personal. Even if they are a third party, you didn't have a relationship before, there's still a personal element that builds when somebody, writes you a check and invests it. These are really tough conversations to have, and they're hard. And I've also been, worked on projects and been stuck for funds, when you've invoiced and you think you're getting paid, and monies didn't come through. And they are hard hits as well because,
mm.
and that can happen for a lot of different reasons. But so yeah, I've had plenty of hard hits, but
And
that's the nature of it.
that's right. Goes with it's part of the territory, isn't it? Let me
Yeah.
ask you about business building. I mean, let's start off with the most. I mean, I always think the point at which you really start building a business is when you start bringing other people on board. I mean, you might have the idea earlier on, and I know people are saying there'll be a one-person unicorn at some point in the near future using AI. But at the moment, I think one of the keys to moving forward is getting the right people on board, getting the right people on the bus. I mean, but it's not easy. I mean, what's your take on getting the right people on the bus? I mean, how have you approached that? How's that working for you? What are
Mm.
the pros and cons? Talk us through that.
Well, look, I have a few different experiences down this route. If we talk about BloodGPT right now, I didn't start the business, so they actually brought me on. So it's slightly different,
Yeah.
and they brought me on. There was an engineering team, AI engineering team there already. There was, a couple of co-founders, and they brought me on. I was an advisor to them, and then after 3 months, approximately, they said, actually, we would love you to kind of really help us build this business properly and drive it. So they made a choice to bring me on and to make that investment and commitment in the business and in me. So that's one thing. Obviously, we bring on more people as we have grown since I've been involved in the business, and we've brought on business development. The AI, the engineering developer team changes, of course, for various different reasons. So it is very key to do that. I think when you identify the right people, you have to find the right energy, the right contact. Are you thinking along similar lines? You can have different opinions, but are you able to discuss those, reconcile those, and align your thinking? Then you also have to have measurement, measurement as to performance. Are they, you all set out with aspirations, and everybody in a new role sets out with an aspiration, but actually, are those aspirations met? Or if they're not met, what are the reasons they're not met? Sometimes things are moving slower in the business than you anticipated. That's not the business development guy's fault. That could be the tech side of it. And it's not a fault, it's just the reality, as we said, that you have to be so agile and so on. So I think you have to understand the context of which you are doing things and what you're trying to drive. Now, I've had other experiences where I've directly employed people and they just didn't measure up. And they didn't measure up for a number of reasons. Under pressure, people respond differently.
Mm.
Not everybody's worked in an early stage startup, and it's a very different beast to having a job, working on projects, being employed, and knowing that there's certainty, knowing that maybe you don't have the same pressure. A lot of people in the healthcare space, if you're working in the UK, also have their original experiences in the public health space. And there's a different mindset there. It's
Yeah.
not a mindset I'm criticizing, but it is a different
And how do
mindset.
you manage that transition? Because some of those NHS people bring tremendous knowledge and skills, but as you
Incredible.
said, worked in a very different environment. I mean, how do you manage that transition into a startup? I mean, if you want to bring those kind of people on board, I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah. So I think you have to, one, understand where they're coming from, understand what their experience is to date and how they've operated and what they've done. You also need to help them understand the new environment in which they're working in. And you can explain that, you can demonstrate that. You kind of hold their hand a little bit, not in a demeaning way, but just for them to get the exposure that actually things are slightly different. Not better, not worse, they're just different. And expectations are different and priorities are different. And for example, it might be that, the bottom line is much more important in a private venture than maybe it was in the public health environment they were working. There were budgets and so on, but the pressure and the need to keep the lights on is very different in a startup to how it might be. So you kind of have to work with them and do it. And sometimes people incredibly step up to the plate. And as you said, or we both said, is that the experience that some of these people who've come maybe out of the NHS, but it's the same in every health system around the world, the experience they have is amazing. And I think what you're also finding is that the NHS and public health systems are changing quite
Yeah.
dramatically. There's a lot of people that have become portfolio careers, so they are doing a certain amount in public health. Again, not just in the UK, other countries as well, but they all want to, from an early stage in their career, dabble and put their foot into opportunity to start up and so on. And therefore, I think today, compared to maybe people I was working with 10 or 12 years ago, their knowledge, their thirst for entrepreneurship, innovation is quite different to what it used to be, and
Mm.
therefore their willingness and their ability to, persevere, to take risk, and so on has changed quite dramatically, which I think is positive. Obviously, it's very positive.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it quite exciting, I think, as well, doesn't it? And quite interesting because people don't want to spend their careers bored. I always think,
Yeah.
you often see people wanting to do things differently, partly
Mhm.
because they want it to be more interesting.
Yeah.
Partly because they want to fix problems, but partly because they get bored.
Yeah.
Let me just
Absolutely.
ask you about building a business in the. I mean, we in the modern age, we build businesses in the spotlight, if you like, of social media when any member of staff could go and talk to any other person on the planet, they could say whatever I mean,
Mm.
it's an incredibly um, interesting environment to be building a business today. Unlike, say, 20 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
when your people can say anything and your partners can say anything. I mean, what's your take on managing that kind of scrutiny and that kind of having people look at everything that you do?
So, it's a really interesting question. It's something that I've grappled with myself.
Mm.
Just, generally, have always been a very private person, more introverted than extroverted. I can survive in the world, I can interact, I can do all those things, but my default would be more introverted. So I've always shied away from social media, and I
Mm.
haven't really put myself out there. But I realize, and that has to change, and that has had to change, and it has changed. But the change was not easy for me personally. So in the first instance, so it took me I had to sum up a huge amount of energy and different type of confidence to kind of go, okay, I'm going to post something on LinkedIn or I'm going to, say something out there because I've never done it before. And there was an element of self-consciousness about it. So I think for me, making that change has been really challenging. I've definitely made it. I'm definitely over the hump. it was quite a hump. It was quite a hump.
And
However,
would you say you're a better leader as a result?
yes. And the reason I would say that is probably, twofold. One is if you don't put yourself out there and you don't engage with what's going on and contribute to what's going on, you don't see everything that's going on.
Mm,
And it's so important to see what's going on because things are moving at such a pace,
mm,
right? And there's such a volume of things that are out there. Yes, you have to decipher what not to waste your time on, of course, because there is such a huge amount of content and so on out there, and some of it can be misleading or whatever the case may be from your own perspective, or not relevant to what you're working on or what your focus is and so on. But I think yes, I think getting over that hump and being less kind of self-conscious about those things has made me a better leader, a better CEO, a better business builder, because I understand an awful lot more and I can engage a lot more and I can see things that are relevant for this business that we can learn from that are happening out there at other corners of the world or even in your back door, for example. But also, in relation to other people, obviously, uh, if you're dealing with people who are in their 20s, this is just part and parcel of every day, right? They have grown up with it. It's
They
just
don't know
social.
anything else, do they? They don't know
No,
anything.
they don't know anything else. I have a 10-year-old son, and it is just like, his ability to search and find out information, his go-to, how he does it, how he communicates is just, it's second nature to him. We had to learn it. We had to learn it, and we had to adjust to it. And some people took to it easier than others. But people who are in their 20s, I mean, using AI, using the tools out there, and learning the tools that are there, they do it so much faster
Mm.
than I do. I almost sometimes feel as if I'm a bit of a dinosaur. And I ask one of the younger people on the team to say, okay, I understand, but why are we using this tool and so on? So, for example, not to, the team partially uses Slack. I really struggle with Slack for some reason. My brain doesn't commute and process the different structures and threads and messaging systems that are in Slack. And I'm getting better at it, but I have really struggled to get into it where some of the team just love it. They think it's the best thing and so on. So I think, but they have to see me willing to do it and to adjust it, but also not to be shy for, some tips and some hints and some ways to do it. I've had a few demos.
Let me ask you about one of the other things you just mentioned about the pace of change. I mean, certainly AI is accelerating that, in my view. Things are changing faster than I've ever known them. I mean, okay, I've been around a long time, but it seems to me that things are moving pretty fast at the moment. How do you, I mean, what's your take as the CEO on keeping up with that? You know, it. I mean, it's kind of like a tidal wave, isn't it, of stuff that's coming
Mhm.
at you all the time. I mean, what's your take on how you manage that tidal wave of stuff? How do you work out, what to focus on, what not to focus on? I mean, what's your
Yeah.
broad experience of those sorts of things?
I think you rely on the younger members of your team to a point. No, look, I think it definitely, you have to be aware of what's happening. You could very easily get lost in the volume
Yeah.
of tech, of AI, of tools, of things that are being pushed, and they are being pushed very hard in front of you every day. For example, we brought on a BD, business development lead, a couple of months ago. And he said to us, look, I want to use these tools. This is how I automate things. This is what we do, and so on. And part of it was, I wasn't fully familiar with a lot of it. Some of it was, but a lot of it I wasn't. And then I had said, well, what about this kind of tool? And he goes, which is brand new, and it was being pushed an awful lot. I was seeing it on LinkedIn and other platforms and so on. And I shared it with him. And he goes, oh yeah, I know that, but it does X, Y, and Z. But I also need A and B, and it doesn't do it that way. And I'd have to do that. And I felt good that I was aware of this new tool and I could bring it to the attention, but also I was very happy to be put in my place and be told, well, actually, it doesn't do what we need to do. That is just for, you know, a simple B2C or consumer, small, household business, family business, or whatever else. This is what we need because it does all of that with steroids. So I think it's important to be aware and to see what's doing. Fortunately, we are an AI tech business. Our CTO is an AI engineer. He's one of the co-founders, very knowledgeable, very experienced, very cutting edge, and he's built a team that works, for us that has all that relevant experience. So I think as the CEO, you have to embrace it. I don't have to find it all. I don't have to learn it all. I'm not the one who's using all of it by any stretch. There are things that I am using and I've learned, and some of those learning curves are pretty steep. But I don't think a business can survive without some of these tools have appeared and that are only going to keep on evolving. And if you look at the pace of how LLMs are developing and what they're doing and the announcements and the accuracy and the new functionality that's coming, it is quite incredible. And then going back to BloodGPT, we build and we work off these generic LLMs. I mean, it's part of our infrastructure that we use. We have a lot more infrastructure around it, but it is part of what we use. And therefore, it's very important to understand it, to embrace it, but also to lean on those people that's more of their expertise. And they lean on me because I have other expertise.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of changing on a day by day basis, it seems to me, which means that, you can't afford not to keep abreast of what's happening. You may not need to use it all, but you'd need to know
Yeah,
what's going on because in case there might be stuff in there that's gonna get
absolutely.
an edge over you or whatever. So it's a very interesting time at the moment, I think. Let me
Yes.
ask you about, I mean, you're part of the reason for the podcast is about this idea that small teams can are rethinking the way supply chains work. I mean, that's exactly what you're doing. You're
Yeah.
impacting on the way test results are managed, essentially, aren't you? Which is changing that supply chain. How do you think that's going to shake down over the next few years? I mean, AI is very exciting, but it also brings with it lots of kind of challenges around security and what have you. And what's your take? What's your take on how that's going to shake down over the next few years?
Well, we are a small team. The team will no doubt grow.
Mm.
However, there's an awful lot that you can do with a small team today
Yeah.
because of the nature of
Yeah.
technology and what you can do. As I said, we are generally spread across three different locations at the moment. Our solution is a online virtual solution. We do an on-premise solution as well because some countries have regulations that require some type of on-premise solution in laboratories or health systems and so on. However, we don't need to deploy a big team anywhere to do something like that. We can go in, we can deploy it and come out again. So I think it's very you have to be very agile. We have to be very smart about how we build and what we do, and you rely on that kind of expertise across the team to be able to do that. And we are constantly learning because actually what we're finding is every conversation that we're having, people are looking for something else. They have their own thought process around it, their own mindset around it, and you have to adjust to that, account for that. Part of what I bring into the business is say, okay, so what's our core? What's our core? But our core keeps on changing because actually more things can come into the core, which is part of the technology acceleration that you're talking about. So we build that core and we at times expand the core as to what is our base kind of, product. And then there's lots of add-ons. We also didn't start off as a modular kind of solution, but again, in all the discussions we're having, different businesses want different types of functionality, and therefore modular is what we've needed to become. And I think that is a great way for us to work, to be able to adjust and move in that way. So, look, it is very dynamic, and that is not. It's both the strength and the weakness. There's an element of trying to lock down the product, and how do you lock down the product when everything is moving, so fast? At the same time, we have to be clear what we're selling and what we're giving to customers. But I think it is changing, and I think that we have to be able to adjust to all those changes, take them on board and deal. And now the regulatory side of things and the data side of things is also moving. And we are grappling with, the right type of data solution. We're putting in data protection agreements with the clients. We're trying to understand the different situation. To a certain degree, there's a consistency across data solutions and data regs across most countries, most jurisdictions, but we do have to account for those in different ways. But we have to stay abreast and we have to keep on moving about everything that is doing. And that's just the nature of it. There's no other way to deal with it. You can't get left behind. And we've an awful lot of work to do to make sure that we're not left behind. And ideally, you want to be leading and doing it. And you don't know when these big changes are going to come out from the big
Yeah, that's right.
infrastructure, LLMs, and we have to be able to respond to those changes, adopt those changes, and so on. But we also have to distinguish ourselves from
Yeah,
competitors, people who are trying to do similar things. And part of our positioning is that we work with these LLMs, and what they are doing is quite incredible. We're not trying to build this huge, big, generic infrastructure LLM like a lot of the players. At the same time, they aren't really going to um, come down to the area that we're in. We're kind of like a middleware solution. We're going to integrate with the laboratories. We're going to integrate with the clinics and the online platforms and the pharmacy platforms and so on. These big LLMs are never going to do that. That's not what they're going to do. We can leverage those. We can be the interface, the bespoke solution that wraps around the current infrastructure that a hospital system or laboratory might have, and the amazing technology that's being developed by the big infrastructure players, and we kind of sit in the middle,
yeah.
and
And
we enable
that
both.
illustrates, I mean, what you've just described illustrates the way that supply chains are changing.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a
yeah.
very good illustration of that and how much more complex they are and they're going to be, I think. Let me ask you though, I mean, you mentioned customers. I mean, what's a good customer for you? What does a good customer look like? How do they feel to work with?
Well, I think the first thing is that they get excited by what we're offering. Not everybody does, of course, but if they are excited and it means that they understand and there's an alignment as to our thinking. So that's a great thing. I gave you the example before. I was at this event in Vegas, this health event, and on two occasions, these kind of guys kind of came by. They looked at it. We had a very brief conversation, but all they kind of said was, "We need this. We want this," and they walked away. And we had great follow-ups, and we are putting in place pilots with both actually. So that's a very quick alignment, which is great. But the ideal customer is we are a volume business, so we want to be processing huge volumes of lab reports and biomarkers effectively because we're a high volume, low price product. That's kind of the solution on an
Yeah.
enterprise level. And so laboratories, health systems, online clinic platforms that are processing huge volumes of tests is our ideal kind of client. And what we're also learning, or what I'm seeing, is that one global laboratory kind of goes, "We love this. This is a great solution. We want to see how we can introduce it and get it to work because we see all these different use
Yeah.
cases."
Yeah.
And another laboratory might say, "Why would we do this? This is not for us to do it. Our end client will do this if they want it. It's not for us to do." So what you realize is that everybody has a different mindset. Everybody looks at it very differently, and therefore, I can't. And that's one of the reasons, going back to something that you asked earlier, is that, I don't want to focus just on one ideal client because I don't think the market, has determined what the ideal client might be. And I don't think it's going to be one ideal client either. I think there are a number of different verticals where we can fit in because we are a middleware, like a processing engine, and we also white label. So one of the other things that have become very attractive and people approach us and say, "We really like that," is that, "We like this app." And they show me the app, and I kind of go, "I love it too. That's great." But they kind of go, "It's B2C. It's a B2C. It's a closed system. We can't integrate it in what we're going to do. We'd have to direct our patients to use that and
Mm.
connect into it or upload whatever else our users." And I've said, "Well, that's not what we do. We want to integrate. We're very happy to be white labeled. We're very happy to be powering the system behind the scenes." And that seems to have gathered a lot of attention and brought a lot of interest to the business because we are open to do that. We can both build our own brand, but we can also be the engine behind the scenes. And if you look at a lot of big businesses that have grown, they have taken that approach, right? There's a lot of businesses,
I
it's
mean,
all
the
about
one
the
that
brand,
springs to mind is Intel.
right?
You know,
Yeah,
and it was the chip inside the laptop, but actually they've got their own independent brand, haven't they? And it's a pretty powerful brand, you
yeah,
know, simply
yeah,
put.
absolutely.
And let me ask you about, I mean, you made a point about, doing business in LA, very different from doing business in London, very different from doing business in Singapore. I mean, what's your take on the kind of cultural nuances of doing business with clients? Because people in different parts of the world have different expectations of how business is done, without wishing to overcomplicate it. But
Yeah.
what's your take on those sorts of issues? Because the lab reports, I mean, in one sense, they're all the same.
Yes, so to a degree, they are absolutely all the same. We have a lot of flexibility across languages, and we can produce reports in over 100 languages.
Mm.
There might be a little bit of formatting required for certain,
Yeah.
right to left and so on, because we're dealing with a few Arabic projects, Arabic language projects at the moment. But yes, culturally, things can be very different, and I think one of the reasons we're interested in the US market is the scale, of course, but also there's a real deal-making attitude. There's a real kind of go get it. There's a real enthusiasm and so on, and that is great to work with and great because it's not just about getting the deal done. It's also very reaffirming about what you're trying to do. So that's great. There's also a little bit there of speaking a big game, and sometimes you find that the game is not quite as big as what's been talked about. But again, we would do the same thing because you're a small young business and you're trying to grow and you have to talk up what you're doing. But we do have quite a diverse client base now, and that is challenging. I think you have to realize the nuances. So we also are working on a number of Eastern European projects, and the mindset is slightly different. The pace of discussion is slightly different. The directness and of how they communicate is can be very direct, which is great as well. And then we also, I think when we were talking a bit earlier, had a conversation with a Saudi business this morning, and we had a conversation last week with a business in also another business in another country in the Middle East, and there culturally, you're absolutely right. It is very different, and I think you have to be nuanced and careful about the pace at which those discussions happen,
Mm.
what they look like, and what it might take to secure them. And I think in some countries there is definitely uh, a lot of talking and a lot of engagement, a lot of relationship building before you actually get to the point of decision, a point of doing a deal. And you have to work with it and find your way and be patient
Yeah.
and use your better judgment. And sometimes you also reach out to people who have experience in a particular market to get their input and their feedback.
Yeah, and I guess to come back to what we were talking about earlier on, I mean, that's part of what makes it so interesting, isn't it? Is that
Yeah.
it's always different. Let me ask you about the journey that you've been. And when you look back, I mean, it sounds like quite an exciting journey. In fact, what you're doing sounds quite exciting,
Yeah.
actually. I know it's quite a bit of a niche area, but I think it sounds quite exciting, the thing that you.
Yes.
When you look back on your journey, I mean, if you were to go back to the beginning, um, what have you learnt from your experiences along the way?
Um, well, one of the points that you raised before is resilience.
Mm.
I've learned to be resilient because you get a lot of knocks along the way,
Yeah,
to different degree than others. Some are just little things that just make you adjust. Others are pretty hard uppercuts, and you have to find that strong jaw and hold your nerve. So I've definitely learned resilience. I've learned that it's not a straight line. You hear about all the success stories, but you don't hear about the ones that struggle. You don't hear about maybe how long it took to get there.
yeah,
The few that you might hear about is how long it took Amazon to actually turn a profit. I mean, it was years and years in the making, and nobody believed that it justified the investment and the valuations until it actually turned that corner, and it got there. So I think you have to be resilient. You have to be patient. You have to learn to work with people because everybody is very, very different. And I have pretty much spent my working career in healthcare since I left the law. And you really get a deep understanding. I'm not a clinician. I don't hold myself out or never suggest it, but you get a really deep understanding of how health systems work, how people think about it, and you have to use that experience to work out how to engage, where to find the opportunities, because also opportunities don't just land in your lap. You have
mm.
to
Got to
go
go and find
look
them,
for
haven't
them
you?
and you have to create
Yeah,
them and you have to think. We've had some meetings and discussions with BloodGPT. I have one with a business in the US, and we collectively came together with actually, this is a really interesting approach that we could consider doing this in this way. Now, if it worked with this particular business, the thinking around that we could roll it out into other approaches. They were quite a specialist business in health and a particular specialty. We could roll out to other things. So I think very agile. You've got to be pretty creative when you're approaching things. And some of these things you weren't taught. School does not teach you to operate or think
It doesn't
like
teach you
this.
most of those things, I
No,
think.
it doesn't.
Unfortunately, I mean, it might teach you some good stuff about history or geography or
It
maths.
does.
It doesn't
It
teach you those
does.
other things, I don't think.
Uh, uh,
Let me ask you then, if you were to go back to the beginning, is there any one thing that you would do differently, knowing what you know now?
well, that is a difficult, tough question. I'm not one to, want to rewrite history. I'm not one to kind of want to say, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I think everything is part of your journey and whatever route that takes with the roller coaster and the ups and downs, that come. I think at one point when I had a pure advisory business, um, I um, I became too dependent on one particular client and therefore the percentage of revenue that came into the business was too reliant on that. And when that relationship came to an end, it was very hard to quickly recover from it to build other clients. So I think, all eggs in one basket, not always good. Perhaps some of that learning is about me now exploring the different potential client bases that we could have, and I don't want to focus on one straight away. But that does hurt because you kind of, if you throw everything into one, it might all work out, but odds are there's a shelf life to it, or it doesn't quite get there, and so
It
on.
might work, but it might not.
It might not, and therefore you need to kind of have your finger in a few different pies, exploring, building, doing to do that. I think that's probably that was one of the hits along the way when it kind of it happened suddenly, and in fact I got notification about it on the day my son was born. So that was a tough morning, both the
Yeah.
joy, the
Talk
happiness
about
of
ups and
that.
downs. I mean, you have some
Right.
good stuff and some not so good stuff. I mean, I
Yeah,
get
yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's
And,
life.
and let me ask you, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Um, Best piece of advice I've ever been given. I think I think, part of it to, believe in myself, but also to be true to yourself.
Mm.
So, you have to go with your gut to a certain degree. You have to really, trust yourself at times. It doesn't necessarily always work out, but you have to believe in what you're doing and you have to trust yourself. And my grandfather, who passed away quite a number of years ago, one of my grandparents, he always said, to thine own self be true. So you have to do something that you believe in. You
Mm.
have to kind of follow it with conviction. If you don't believe in it and you're not committed to it, it's very hard to deliver and make it work. But I think you create an internal conflict. And if you have an internal conflict, it's very hard, even in business, not just about life or whatever else, but in business, if you have an internal conflict, it's pretty tough to really deliver on it. So you have to find that what you're doing, you have an alignment. And that's why when BloodGPT kind of came my way, I really felt as if I had a personal need for it as well, and it made complete sense to get into it. So, yeah, being true to yourself, finding it, and
Yeah.
aligning yourself.
Sounds like your grandfather gave you a great piece of advice there, I would say. And if you were to offer a rookie CEO just starting out, what would piece of advice would you offer them?
Well, of course, I would pass on the same.
Yeah.
I couldn't
Apart from
not.
that.
That needs to. Apart from that, though, I think that it would be to really throw yourself into what you're doing. You have to really commit yourself, and you have to really immerse yourself in the business, in the area that the business is operating in. You have to be very aware of what else is going on. And I think today, more than ever, with the pace of change with technology,
Mm.
you have to be looking. You have to have your eyes wide open, because you can both learn from what other people are doing because it's open, it's out there, you can see
Mm.
it, you can learn
Yeah,
from
yeah,
it.
yeah,
But it can also kill your business
yeah.
if you don't look at it and you don't see it. So I think it is, it's a real eyes wide open approach to business today because there are so many amazing ideas, so many amazing businesses, and there are going to be so many businesses and ideas that are the same as yours or just ever so slightly different. And you have to understand where you fit within them, and also that competitors aren't necessarily competitors the way they were back in
Mm.
the day. Often competitors can be strategic partners in a different way with a different mindset. And I find that a lot in health tech at the moment, having some discussions with businesses. And you could quickly say, oh, but they're a competitor of yours. Well, only to a degree they are. They do something that we don't do. We do something they don't do. Is there a way to strategically find a way to work together and complement each other? So yeah, that's the type of advice I'd probably give.
Yeah, good advice, I think. Let me ask you one sort of final question just before we wind up, which is not really about your business as such, but about the environment that you're in. I mean, we've already talked quite a bit about the impact of AI. I mean, what's your take on how it's going to shake down over the next few years? I mean, lots of stuff happening could have quite a big impact. What's your take on how it's going to shake down?
Yes, I think there's huge impact coming. I think our working life, our business models, everything is changing,
Yeah.
and we have to embrace it. When I first started to learn about AI, is I realized that to fight it, the door is open. That's Pandora's box. It's gone. We have to embrace it. If I don't embrace it, I'm
It's not
52.
going away, is it?
It's certainly not going away, and the best thing we can do is embrace it. It doesn't mean we have to, agree with all of it. There will be things as AI is developing and tech is developing that we might need to get reined back at some point because of regulation and other things haven't kept up with it. Because there's good and bad with everything that kind of gets developed. But I do think that uh, there are many things that we experience today where things that I looked at on TV in the Star Trek days, in the 80s, that you kind of go, this is amazing, right? And some of that functionality is already there, and more of it, no doubt, will come. And I think you have to embrace it. You have to work out how you can use it in your personal life, in your business life, and not be afraid of it, because actually every generation feels as if they're getting left behind. And as the pace increases,
Mm.
one's effort has to increase to try and stay with it, on top of it, ahead of it, whatever the case may be. But I do think there are jobs that don't even exist now that my son will be doing. He's 10 years old.
Mm.
He hears things that he could be doing that don't exist. And then I suppose one last thing is that, going back to healthcare, going back to BloodGPT, um, doctors and clinicians will have a different function in the future.
Yeah.
They don't need to remember. I remember being in university, and the med students were trying to learn this vast amount of information. Like, just incredible the amount of information they tried to learn. I could never have done that. I don't believe that they will need to do that because the volume of information is just exponentially growing. But we have tech that can actually give us access to that at in a minute, in a second, right? It's all there. So how do we teach it? How do we use it? How do we ask the right questions? How do we challenge the right things? That's going to be the function in a different way for some, not all surgeons are surgeons, etc. Although there's the robotic side of it as well. But I think it's that side of it. How do we use the technology? How do we train it? How do we train ourselves to use it in the right way and leverage it is part of the secret, I think, probably going forward.
I mean, what you're saying is it's not about the knowledge per se, it's about how you interpret it and use it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we're not short of knowledge. I mean,
No.
that's the thing. I mean, we've got more knowledge, more information than we can deal with. It's how do you apply it in ways, and how do you use the technology to help you to do that? I mean, very interesting point. I think your other point there about, what was it the Chinese say? If it cannot be avoided, it must be welcomed. I
Mhm.
mean, I think that is, it's never going to go away. You can't unlearn AI.
I,
So
I,
you've got to
yeah.
ride the wave, it seems to me.
You're absolutely right. I remember seeing a year and a half ago, somebody being interviewed and saying that, you know, schools can't, in learning and teaching, avoid technology. You
Mm.
can't avoid the fact that AI is there. You can't avoid that. We have all this software that was developed to try and, protect against plagiarism and pulling stuff off the internet. The principle of that is absolutely fine. I get all of that. You shouldn't be able to, cheat as such. However, we have to embrace the tech, and we have to accept that my son and that generation, their need to learn and how they learn and what they learn is going to be very different to what I learned.
Yeah.
and how I use that education. So we have to embrace that. Otherwise, you'll have a complete two, three-tier system if everybody doesn't embrace that and jump in with 2 feet on it.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think whichever way it shakes down is going to be an interesting few years, that's for certain. Jonathan, thank you for coming on. Thank you for talking us through that story. Some really useful bits of insight there, so I really appreciate that. And thanks for making the effort. I know you're pretty busy, you've got lots on your plate, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. And hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
That would be great. Thanks for inviting me. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, I look forward to keeping in touch.
Likewise. See you soon. Bye bye.